The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericahealth.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. Are you trying to master the game of life without success? There are secrets and strategies to living your best life. We'll share some of them with you on today's show. Take advantage of this series to become an expert at relationships. All relationships. It's time to live the life that you deserve to live. Now, here's your host, Sandra Reish.
Welcome back to Straight Talk, and if you could see me, I'm smiling from ear to ear. I am so excited about today's show. It's an incredible honor, and it's going to be incredibly informative. Talk about living the life you deserve. So let me tell you what we're going to be talking about today, and then I'll tell you about my very, very special guest. I refer to him as an American treasure. The theme is that you have to wonder when you're out there, why are we getting fatter, sicker, unhealthier? There's so much science. Every day we read in the newspaper, there's new supplements, there's new diets, there's new research. So how come we're doing so poorly? Well, I brought in the big guns. I have a real treat with me, Dr. T Colin Campbell, who's the author of the China Study, which really is the most important book written in the last 75 years, and a book that profoundly changed my life. Let me tell you a little bit about him. For over 40 years, Dr. Campbell has been at the forefront of nutrition research. His legacy for sure is the China Study, which is known as the most comprehensive study of health and nutrition ever conducted. Dr. Campbell is also the author of the best-selling book, Whole, and a Jacob Gould Sherman Professor Emeritus, that's a mouthful, of nutritional biochemistry at Cornell University. He has received more than 70 grant years of peer-reviewed research funding and authored more than 300 research papers. The China Study was the culmination of a 20-year partnership with Cornell University and the Chinese Academy of Preventive Medicine. His new book, Whole, picks up where the China Study left off, and the Chinese Study revealed what we should eat. We're going to talk about that today, and Whole really answers the question of why. So let me start by saying a deep, deep thank you for being here, Dr. Campbell, and welcome to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish.
Thank you so much. Can I add just one comment? The project in China also included Oxford University in England.
Well, that's an important detail, so thank you very much for adding that. Now, as I started, Dr. Campbell, we started on the fact that our society, North American society, we are getting fatter and sicker, and we're not doing well. Now, I want to get into why that is, but I want to also give a bit of background on you, because I think it's interesting, ironically, before we get into your research, I think it's fascinating and relevant to mention that you grew up on a dairy farm, and I believe from what I've read, you ate the typical American diet for most of your younger life. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I also read that you were actually studying how to produce more animal protein at one point.
Yeah, that was my doctoral dissertation at Cornell University. Yes.
Okay. So let's ask the question now. Today, these days, what is your work focused on as opposed to increasing animal protein for those people who live under a rock and don't know you?
Well, mostly I'm, of course, writing a couple of books, and I'm involved in some documentary movies, but most of all, I'm still writing some papers and giving a lot of lectures. Mm-hmm. I probably have given more than 600 lectures, I think, since the China Study came out, both in professional and public audiences.
Now, the China Study is a book that changed everything for almost everyone. I can remember myself reading it, and I remember it comes to my mind right away, the part of the book where you talk about carcinogens being in our body right from birth, but we don't have to fertilize the carcinogens. So for people listening who don't know exactly what the China study is about, this revolutionary book, which I urge people to run to get, what is the China study for people who don't know, and what does it mean today? What were the results of this study?
Well, the China study, of course, is a book. It was published in 2005, and it actually summarizes much of my career that started actually on August 1st this year, 60 years ago.
Wow.
But in any case, it's a book that summarizes the research that I and my students and colleagues did over the years. And for much of the early part of my career, it was in the laboratory. We were working at a very fundamental level on questions concerning the role of nutrition and cancer formation, for example. And we learned a lot. And that was all in experimental setting, actually using experimental animals in this particular case, in those early years of laboratory rodents, actually. But then once getting that information and learning a great deal about, how does protein really work at the mechanistic level, so to speak, we had the opportunity to go to China and work with a very large population there and seeing whether or not what we were learning in the laboratory was consistent with what we might see in humans. So the China study actually took the name of the project in China, but that project itself was really just one chapter of about 18 chapters altogether. And so it was a combination of the early research in the laboratory, the big study in China, and I should add about 20 years worth of experience in national policy development on food and health. So that combination, together with obviously reference to other studies that have been done over the years and oftentimes forgotten, that combination is what I tried to develop in the China study. And incidentally, a co-author of that China study was my son, Tom, who at the time had been his undergraduate major had been in theater, and he was on stage in Chicago when he came back to work with me to get a little funding for himself. But then he got fascinated with this. He went back to med school, did a residency in family medicine, and now is the clinical director of a very exciting new program called Nutrition and Medicine at a major medical school, University of Rochester.
Wonderful.
So the book is, it really is, it's a sort of a lifetime discussion, I guess, or discussion of my work over the years and why I changed my mind from what it was in the beginning. We came up with a lot of things that I like to call principles of nutrition.
Oh, I can't wait to hear these.
Yeah, I taught nutrition in the traditional way, at a major university, at Cornell University, if you will, and biochemistry. I taught those topics in a fairly traditional way. But with the passing of time, I got a somewhat different view.
What's the different view? What did you find out?
Well, in the early days, and still for many people, the principal nutrient that more or less defines our diet is protein, the nutrient protein. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, people tend to think protein is the same thing as meat because they think protein is only found in animal foods like meat, dairy, and eggs. Unfortunately, that's not true. Yes, those animal foods are rich in protein, a certain kind of protein, but protein is also present in plants. And we can get all the protein we need from plants, if I can jump ahead.
Yes.
So the early days, it was my interest, my research was focused on that. But then we learned fairly quickly we could turn on and turn off experimental cancer by just adjusting the level of protein within normal limits.
So you were saying that you could turn on and turn off the cancer genes?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah,
right. Cancer takes a while to fully develop. It starts out with essentially a mutation that's caused usually by a chemical that's called a carcinogen. And so we get exposed to these kind of chemicals, obviously, on a fairly routine basis, but our bodies under normal conditions can handle that problem fairly easily. But the high protein diet basically sort of catalyzes a much higher activity of those carcinogens and therefore stimulates the production of cancer. And so when we feed protein at the higher level, we get a faster rate of cancer development. And then if we switch the diet to a lower level of protein, enough to meet the needs for protein, the cancer stops growing. We give it back again and we turn it back on again. I mean, that whole idea of turning cancer on and off was, it really is revolutionary, I have to say, because in those days and still today, most people think cancer is caused only by genes or only by the chemicals in our food or maybe by viruses, if you will. And when in reality, cancer is mostly controlled by the kind of nutrients that we consume. And not just one, like protein, but all the other nutrients that come along with the consumption of animal-based protein. And on that point, I ought to say, too, that it's animal protein that turned on the cancer, not plant protein.
Oh.
It was the major protein of cow's milk, of all things.
Oh.
And that's why I do appreciate your mentioning I was raised on a dairy farm, because, hello, are we still there?
We're still there.
Okay.
We are still here. This is so important.
I'm sorry, my computer just went black. But in any case, I started out on a dairy farm, and so when we were getting this kind of information, it was a little hard to, contemplate that idea that higher protein would turn on cancer. But there was. We continued to work on that idea, and we spent quite a number of years really understanding the basic biochemistry. For me, in science, we like to depend on evidence before we start talking about something. And when you see something like that that's so provocative and so different from what you otherwise think, I mean, I can tell you it's a really good idea to get right down to the nitty-gritty and understand, if this thing is true, how does it work? And as we got into that kind of research, I turned up a lot of, as I said before, so-called principles that were at odds with what one tends to find in nutrition books. So it was exciting. Still is very exciting.
I guess it was exciting, and I guess it was a shock coming from a dairy farm, and through the China study and your research, you find out that protein, there's a lot of myth in terms of animal protein, and that milk is at the head of part of the problem. And child growing up on a dairy farm, you learned that milk, and as all of us learned, the milk is such a wholesome food. And you've been quoted in the press as being anti-milk, as going as far as anti-milk, and that casein is a really big problem, which is found in milk. Am I correct?
Yeah, casein is the main protein of the cow's milk protein. It makes up about 85% of that total protein. So it's by far and away the main protein of cow's milk. But then again, as I say, the story didn't stop just there with the protein. It really eventually evolved into studies of other nutrients and patterns of nutrients, and of course the kinds of foods that have those patterns. And so the story became, of course, quite a bit bigger.
So I guess it's fair to assume, I know the answer, but for everyone listening, that you stopped drinking milk and you got away from animal protein after finding these very, as you call them, exciting results.
That's right. We have a fairly big family, and my wife obviously was very interested in that. So we got
This is a live show.
we got really interested, and she started changing our diet, cooking food in a rather different way. I mean, she became very enthusiastic for this too. We have 5 children now grown, and I should say we just had our 9th grandchild.
Oh, congratulations.
Of course, we have spouses in that mix, and so 100% of us now eat this way. There's no one not eating this way.
So in terms of people listening, what is the optimal diet? I mean, you're a very famous researcher. What have you found out is the optimal diet to not turn on those cancer cells and to, really give the best nutrition to your body? What is optimal nutrition?
Well, I came up with this crazy kind of name, a little bit awkward, by the name of whole food, plant-based. I like that name still today, even if it's awkward, because it distinguishes it to some extent from the vegan diet and from the vegetarian diet. And I would like to say that I did not get into this research to advocate those dietary lifestyles. In fact, I didn't even know about them, to be honest about it, for much of my career. But the whole food plant-based diet is vegetables, fruits, grains, whole grains, I should say, legumes, and I'm okay with some nuts and the higher fat plant foods to some extent. We don't overdo any of that, but the combination is those kind of foods to make a menu or recipe or infinite. We can think about them in all sorts of different ways.
So on the opposing side, do you feel that the typical American diet of milk, meat, cheese, those kinds of things, do you consider that a dangerous way to eat?
Well, it's very clear, abundant evidence, overwhelming evidence that kind of diet increases the risk for cancer, heart disease, diabetes, many autoimmune diseases, and some other sort of nuisance kinds of things, just chronic pain and just overall health. So, that's what the data show. And as I say, it was almost uncomfortable saying that early on when we were getting this information because, I'm coming from the farm. I'm a typical guy, really. And to go back and tell friends and others that, hey, we're not eating the right thing, that doesn't sit too well with many people. But, once you get into it and you start eating that way, as I'm sure you appreciate, then our taste preferences begin to change. And what I mean by that more specifically is that we're addicted to diets that are high in fat.
Addicted.
It really is. It's a classical addiction that involves, some brain chemistry. And it takes a little while to get away from that. But when we do, and you get on that kind of diet, I've never enjoyed food so much in my life. And of course, the health benefits we get are, over the top. And so there you have it. As I say, for some it's a little bit difficult to get there. For others, they can do it tomorrow, and see the benefits really quickly. Actually, we see the benefits really quickly with this kind of diet, by the way. And food is all of a sudden become really, really delicious.
Yes, it does. So, Dr. Campbell, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we can talk a little bit about the pushback and the controversy that goes with your research. And also, since you talked about milk, I'd love for people to hear about the research on early onset puberty in young girls and milk, and why is this something for us to be concerned about. So we'll take a short break, and we'll be right back with Dr. T. Colin Campbell on Straight Talk with Sandra Reich.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
Change your life forever with the latest cutting-edge products for home study treatment for anxiety, featuring the clinical director of the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression and host of Straight Talk, Sandra Reich. Sandra is joined by top therapist Georgia Dow in this revolutionary anxiety videos therapy series. Thousands of people have benefited from this scientifically proven treatment approach. Isn't it time you chose yourself? Visit anxiety-videos.com right now. That's anxiety-videos.com and change your life forever.
Join the therapist who is affectionately known as the Couple Whisperer, Sandra Reich, on her famous couple retreats and change your life forever. Sandra offers couple retreats in beautiful locations several times a year that can radically change your love life. Couples describe her retreats as life-changing. Regain that loving feeling, bring your intimacy to a new level, and rediscover excitement and joy. Find out more at helpforanxietydepression.com or call 514-796-4357. We all want love and safety. Now you can have it. Call 514-796-4357 or helpforanxietydepression.com.
Spa Munari is a full-service wellness day spa located at the heart of West Island, Quebec. Submerge yourself in beauty with one of our many treatments, specially catered to your needs. We offer facials, manicures, pedicures, hair removal, massages, body treatments, and so much more. Enjoy our ultimate relaxation experience with our spa packages. We offer a men's menu as well. Call us today to book your next appointment at 514-695-5040 or visit us on the web at spamunari.com. That's 514-695-5040 or spamunari.com.
A fresh look at today's health. Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. To connect with the program today, please call 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email to info@helpforanxietydepression.com. Now, back to Straight Talk. Here's Sandra Reish.
So I'm back with the brilliant, passionate, and very important Dr. T. Colin Campbell. Again, I want to say personally, I've heard him speak, I've read his books, and they have been life-changing for me. And like he starts off in his lectures, he presents pure science. And I really appreciate that because it's not just, people have a lot of different viewpoints, but you can't argue with science. And Dr. Campbell says that all the time. And I love that. And me and my husband attended the holistic cruise this year. And my husband was a little bit reluctant about this kind of eating. And after hearing you speak, I want you to know the entire family, including our 2 kids, are on whole food plant-based diet. You were saying that's an awkward statement. It's funny, I asked you a question in the audience. I called us a vegan, and you said you don't love the term vegan. And you explained that there's many vegans who eat very unhealthy food. Is that right?
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
What's the difference between a vegan and a whole food plant-based diet person?
Well, a vegan, of course, is not using animal foods for any kind of animal foods, as well as not using them otherwise too. So that's step number one. It's a good step. But unfortunately, they are primarily relying on their motive. Their primary motivation is ethically based, which is fine. But they have not given enough attention to the basic science. And as a result, they tend to consume diets that are too high in added fat and refined carbohydrates. And so they might eat a lot of Twinkies and so forth, even if it's made out of plant-based stuff. But that's not the way to go. The biggest study that I'm familiar with, most recent survey of vegans, is that it shows that they're consuming diets on average, about 30% of total calories is fat. 30%. When I'm talking about diets, it should be around 10%, 10%. So we see some benefits, some health benefits for vegans, but we don't see the kind of benefits that you can get with the whole food plant-based diet, which doesn't have all that extra refined carbohydrate and fat.
I think that's a very important distinction because I think that we hear the word vegan a lot, and it is still the word that people use when they're not consuming animal protein. But I think you're right. You could live on French fries and Twinkies and call yourself a vegan. And I don't think we're doing the science that you talk about. So getting back to right before the break, some of the science has a lot to do with milk and cheese and, of course, the processed food and, of course, the meat. I mentioned that your research shows that milk may cause early onset puberty in young girls. Now, for people listening, so what?
Well, for one thing, I should point out that historically, or let's say in other research over the past 2 or 3 decades, there's one thing that's really stood the test of time, and that is the earlier the age of men are, the higher is the risk for breast cancer.
Okay, that's a very important statement. Maybe say it again.
Yeah, the earlier the age of menarche, the higher is the subsequent risk for breast cancer. Now, the age of menarche is primarily driven by the rate at which a young girl grows. That, in turn, is dependent on consuming a rich, protein-rich, high-fat type of diet, typically that's used in North America. So The high-fat, high-protein diet, causes the child to grow a little bit faster, and as a result, the reproductive years come sooner. Not a good idea. The average age of menarche for women in North America and more or less Europe is around 11 years or so. That's really. In China, what we found, rather surprisingly, the average age for starting the menstrual periods was 17 years.
Come on.
It was 17 years, and it ranged from, across the different counties and villages that we surveyed, a lot of them, it ranged from a low of 15 to a high of 19. I mean, there was a county or so that was 19 years was the average age before they started reproductive life, if you will. So, and anyhow, knowing that, what we found was that the high-protein diet, starts to many, as I said, the menses earlier. In addition, when that period begins, then the level of estrogen in the blood actually kind of surges, and it remains high, with monthly fluctuations, of course, but it remains high until menopause. And so what we saw in the rural Chinese, the age of menarche was much later. And in addition, the age of menopause is earlier, by about 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And so the Chinese woman has a reproductive life about 9 years shorter than the Western woman. Number one. That's number one.
Okay.
Number two, at the same time, their circulating levels of estrogen and estrogen-like steroids is only about 50 or 60% as high as a Western woman. So when you add all that up, shorter total reproductive years and a lower level of estrogen, that in turn is a very strong predictor and very likely a cause of, the opposite, the higher levels, is a cause of breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Breast cancer, ovarian cancer are higher when there's more prolonged exposure to estrogen, driven in turn, by the Western diet, which causes earlier age of menarche, later age of menopause. And a few other things factor into that too, but that's the basic story. And,
so for all the parents listening to the show, and a lot of my clientele are parents, really we're doing a great gift to our kids to take them off this kind of animal protein to immunize them, or at least attempt to immunize them for less of a chance of breast cancer or cancers in general down the road. Absolutely. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And incidentally, what applies to young girls, I think also applies to young boys.
I would imagine.
We don't have quite the same detail for the male, but basically it's prostate cancer. Prostate cancer is also a function of the consumption of a typical Western diet, especially a diet high in dairy. So we got these foods, unfortunately, that we're using a lot, and basically turning on the cancer of the reproductive tract, if you will, both in males and females. Not a good deal.
Not a good deal at all. Now, so many things to ask you about, and I want to get to the pushback because I'm sure the diet industry is not so thrilled with you, because that's certainly not what we're hearing on, milk does the body good and all these things we hear. Your book, even the China study, says there's implications for diet, weight loss, and long-term health. Now, I know people who really, they can't think at 20 years old about cancer, but they do think about weight loss. So I want to try to get that angle in there. What does eating a whole food, plant-based diet have to do with weight loss?
Oh, it's one of the best things that we can possibly do. And mostly because when we continue on that diet, it becomes a lifestyle, if you will. The weight loss is mostly sustained. It's mostly sustained. It's not a kind of thing where the weight drops off in first month or two or three and then comes back, for the most part. I mean, there are some exceptions, like there is in everything else in medicine and biology. Some individuals have more difficulty keeping that weight off, even when they're consuming this kind of diet, than we might otherwise expect. But they're very much in the minority. So then what we have to start thinking about a little bit is exercise. This kind of diet together with routine exercise, that's the real deal. And to keep weight off and remain reasonably slim and fit and active physically, eat this food. number one, first thing to do. Secondly, make sure that we get some exercise along with it. And drink a lot of water, by the way, plenty of water. We got to remain hydrated. That combination is really the best thing in town, for keeping weight loss off. And, as everyone knows, we got the low carb phenomenon.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you about that.
Yeah, those folks really, really dislike what I talk about. They're advocates for a diet very high in animal-based foods. Unfortunately, right to the last person, the authors, none of those people have really had any serious, usually almost no experience in experimental research, number one. So they don't publish in professional journals. They're not held accountable professionally for their views. But they get away with it because they publish books and people like to hear good things about their bad habits. And so, the message gets out there. It's a very poor message, very bad message gets out there. Now, that kind of diet, though, it tends to sell in part because when people go on a low-carb diet, Atkins type of diet, what they will tend to see if they're overweight, they'll see their weight drop. It's pretty routine in the very beginning. But that's for a slightly different reason, and it doesn't last. It doesn't last. And, of course, with the passing of time, they have a much higher risk of heart disease and cancer and all the rest. So the low-carb diet is really, as I put in one of the books I wrote, it's a fraud.
It's a fraud.
It's not based on real science. We can, for example, and just in one of the most classic comparisons to make, I think, on this point, we can take people who have some health problems, and most people do, one sort or another. We can take people like that and actually reverse their disease, make them well, very quickly, and they can see the benefits in a week to 10 days. We can't do that with a low-carb diet. It doesn't do it. It might cause weight loss straight off in the very beginning, but they're right back where they were, and even worse if they continue that. So there's no other so-called dietary version that can create health so fast as what the whole food plant-based diet can do.
Okay, so, every day in my practice, people come in and they tell me, no, the paleo diet, that's the way to go. Eat lots of meat and, you're going to get fat on those carbohydrates. Your message is, obviously I'm a fan, I'm a believer, but your message is completely opposite than that. And people are reading constantly, this is the hot trend, paleo diet, paleo diet, paleo diet. What is your answer to, the fact that all of us are just walking around reading the newspaper and trying to get the information to live the best lives possible? We're up against a nutrition industry that does not necessarily, I think, according to what you believe, want us to have the truth.
Well, for one thing, the paleo diet is nothing more than just the latest version of the low-carb fraud.
Okay.
Number one. And it succeeds in large measure because people like to hear good things about their bad habits, as I said. In addition, we've got some very, very powerful industries, as we all know, that love the paleo diet. And I can tell you that marketing of that idea comes in all different forms, all kinds of forms. And when you got that kind of money involved in the marketing, not even necessarily saying the paleo diet, that's what people believe. So unfortunately, and this has been the case for decades, even centuries, quite frankly, we are very much subject to public messages. And the public messages flourish in an environment where there's plenty of money to spend for those messages. So that's the way it is. And it's a fact of life. And the paleo diet is the same as the Atkins diet as far as I'm concerned. There's not a whit of difference, really, and it's not a good diet.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so grateful for you to take the time to come on this show and all the interviews you give, because it's, I admire that you keep on getting the word out, and I'm sure that you do face resistance from time to time, do you not?
Yes, I do, of course, and it's been that way for some time. Though remain optimistic, primarily because I was in science without necessarily speaking quite like this for much of my career. I had a good career. I published extensively in the professional literature. The others don't. And so I will rest my case
On science.
On anything that I've published in the past. People can go look up the work that I did. And and to me, this really does work. I'm absolutely confident that it is the truth, the nearest thing to truth that I can think of health-wise. And so it's going to stay hang around. The last time I checked, I think most people want to be healthy.
Last time I checked too.
And so, if they really want to be healthy, all I can say to them, even if they are opposed to this on some grounds, give it a try.
Give it a try.
We've been doing that, and as I say, the results that we get just in 10 days is amazing.
Yes, it certainly has been amazing in my family, and it's affected us on so many different levels. Health, aches in the body, weight for sure. The weight drops off quite easily, and I really don't feel like we're missing anything. On that note, though, I do want to ask you about, before we go to a break, about protein again, because it seems that your research showed that not all proteins are equal, because I saw in your research, for example, casein, milk, animal products seems to develop cancer development, but let's say soy and wheat do not. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's work that we did directly, but we did some other things too, as others have done. I mean, the casein effect is high animal protein diet, for example, or high animal-based protein, basically. That was showed more than 100 years ago to be the principal cause of increases in blood cholesterol.
Wow.
Which in turn is sort of the main indicator of heart disease. And
wow.
that research was there, published in professional literature, really demonstrated very clearly, but basically was ignored because nobody wanted to hear anything bad about animal-based protein.
100 years, wow. So 100 years we've had that kind of research.
1909 to be specific, when that was first published.
It's incredible. Okay, we're going to have to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the controversies even within whole foods, such as white rice, oil. I want to talk about oil for sure, because there was a little controversy at the end of that holistic cruise. You may remember at the panel, the last day of the cruise, there was a discussion on oil. And I want to talk about oil, and I want to talk about supplements. So we'll take a short break, and we'll be right back with the brilliant and fascinating Dr. T. Colin Campbell on Straight Talk with Sandra Reich.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
Change your life forever with the latest cutting-edge products for home study treatment for anxiety, featuring the clinical director of the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression and host of Straight Talk, Sandra Reich. Sandra is joined by top therapist Georgia Dow in this revolutionary anxiety videos therapy series. Thousands of people have benefited from this scientifically proven treatment approach. Isn't it time you chose yourself? Visit anxiety-videos.com right now. That's anxiety-videos.com and change your life forever.
Spa Munari is a full-service wellness day spa located at the heart of West Island, Quebec. Submerge yourself in beauty with one of our many treatments, specially catered to your needs. We offer facials, manicures, pedicures, hair removal, massages, body treatments, and so much more. Enjoy our ultimate relaxation experience with our spa packages. We offer a men's menu as well. Call us today to book your next appointment at 514-695-5040 or visit us on the web at spamunari.com. That's 514-695-5040 or spamunari.com.
Join the therapist who is affectionately known as the Couple Whisperer, Sandra Reich, on her famous couple retreats and change your life forever. Sandra offers couple retreats in beautiful locations several times a year that can radically change your love life. Couples describe her retreats as life-changing. Regain that loving feeling, bring your intimacy to a new level, and rediscover excitement and joy. Find out more at helpforanxietydepression.com or call 514-796-4357. We all want love and safety. Now you can have it. Call 514-796-4357 or helpforanxietydepression.com.
Your life, your health, your network. This is Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. To connect with the program today, please call 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email to info@helpforanxietydepression.com. Now, back to Straight Talk. Here's Sandra Reish.
So many questions, so little time. We'll have to have Dr. Campbell back again. But for people listening who you definitely want to follow his work, it's science. It's pure science, people, and you can't argue with science. Dr. Campbell, how do people find you, first of all? What's the website?
Well, we have a site that has an online course on plant-based nutrition. It is Nutrition Studies, all one word, Nutrition Studies, plural, .org.
So that online course is important because people are listening and maybe some people are getting motivated, but they don't know how to do a plant-based diet. Does the online course help with this?
Well, at the present time, it's mostly focused on the evidence, what supports this idea. Quite convincing. We've had great success with it. We partnered with Cornell University, the program on online teaching. And of the many courses Cornell has, we're number one in terms of applicants. And we also offer 30 Category 1 continuing medical education credits for doctors and other healthcare workers. So we've had great fun. We're actually, to answer your question, we haven't covered all the topics yet as well as we would like. We've just changed the format. We're now having more video kinds of presentation. We're finding it very exciting, and we're going to have specific, topics on cooking and
great.
How-to kind of ideas, plus other issues as we go forward.
And I think your wife also has a cookbook.
Our daughter, Leanne Campbell, she has a cookbook called the China Study Cookbook. And our daughter-in-law, whose husband was the director, that's our son, who was the director of the film Plant Pure Nation, his wife, our daughter-in-law, Kim Campbell, wrote a cookbook called Plant Pure Nation Cookbook. So two cookbooks. One is China Study Cookbook, the other Plant Pure Nation Cookbook.
So if people are listening to this and they don't really know where to start, getting a cookbook is definitely very helpful because I think people think that eating this way is difficult. And I really want to support Dr. Campbell here in saying that I switched my whole family over and we eat everything. I mean, technically we even eat ice cream. I mean, it's not animal-based ice cream, but we eat everything like enjoyable. We make it with frozen fruit, and I have young kids, and they're having delicious food. You have to learn the recipes, but there's definitely ways around getting those things that you crave and keeping it in a whole food, plant-based way. And actually, I don't think I've ever eaten so much in my life, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah, it's good. Incidentally, there is one more book I should mention. That's the co-author of our China study, my son Tom. He's written a book called The Campbell Solution.
Okay.
Really doing quite well. People might want, and that's more of a how-to kind of thing to some extent than some of the others, yeah.
Let's talk about the movies for a moment, and then hopefully we'll get the oil in today. So a few years ago, I saw a movie called Forks Over Knives, which you're in. The goal of that movie was what?
Was basically just to introduce this topic to the public, because at that time it really hadn't happened. And it really started with the China study. And Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, my good friend, the guy who reversed heart disease, and I were the principals in that, but then there were a lot of other colleagues who were brought into the film too. That film was produced by a group out of California, Hollywood, and we just played our parts. That film has been seen by, so I'm told, at least 20 million people.
Wow.
It's really done well. Now that we've got a second film that's produced by my oldest son called Plant Pure Nation.
What's that about?
That's more about not just telling here's the information, but it was more about why haven't we heard this before?
So it's advocating.
That in turn relates, as one might imagine, to political structure and activity. And so that started out with Dr. Esselstyn and I actually speaking on the floor of the Kentucky legislature.
Yes.
With 100 members, and they got enthused about it, and one thing led to another. It sort of tells the story of how trying to do something in that state really caused quite a row. And the lobbies got involved and blocked it, and they came back, my son did, with a different kind of message, and I'll leave the rest of it for the viewer. But it's sort of that, reflecting the difficulty of getting this message out.
I really recommend both these movies for people who are interested in starting this way, in particular Forks and Knives, to start off understanding a little bit more of the science. And I mean, I do think that changing your life this way is a process. It was a process for me. A lot of people ask me, well, I can do this, but I can't do that. And I do tell them it took me time. It didn't happen overnight. And I think these are good places to start. Now, for people who don't have an idea, I think I hear someone cooking in the background there. So what does Dr. Campbell eat in a given day? Like what was today like?
Today was not a typical day because we're on the road driving from Washington up here. But normally we start out with in the morning with cereal. I like oatmeal almost continuously. Oatmeal with lots of fresh fruit. In wintertime, it's the frozen fruit that we pick during the summer. But in any case, fresh fruit as much as possible. And then we do have sometimes pancakes, whole grains of one kind or another, again with big dollops of fruit, on it. Lunchtime, salads. Actually, you get to a place, I'm sure you appreciate this too, with this kind of eating, you eventually get to a place where you actually crave a salad.
I find I crave the salad.
Yeah.
My husband and I, we can't go to bed before we have our extra salad. Like, it's unbelievable.
And that's right. And I would never said that years ago, and you probably wouldn't have either. But
nope.
And a lot of people still wouldn't say it. They think it's a bit crazy, but it's true.
It is true.
And so a salad, maybe soup, maybe a hot dish, possibly. Then dinner time, it's a variety of dishes that my wife has been really good about fashioning over the years, and some of them are found in the cookbooks I just mentioned of her daughter.
Yeah, she has some great recipes. Your daughter has amazing recipes.
A lot of variety, a lot of opportunities for different kinds of dishes using this kind of food. It's endless.
It's endless. Legumes, sweet potatoes, all sorts of things. So you talked about salad, and that brings up that controversy that happened at the end of this cruise I was on with you guys. You've all been on my radio show. You've all been so nice to me. And there was this controversy about oil. So people think of salad, they think of oil. We were taught that olive oil is a health food. We were taught oil was good for us. Dr. Campbell, what's the science on this?
Okay, I got to be upfront about a couple of things to what we're talking about. Oil, of course, is present in plants. The solid kind, fat, is present mostly in animal foods. The animal foods is saturated fat. The plants are sort of polyunsaturated plants. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, so that's the oil and fat in food. When it's in the form of whole food, I'm not too concerned, as long as it's plant-based. Okay? That's point number one. Point number two is that most of the oil that we actually consume, especially in North America, is the oil we add to things. We use fried foods. We make up salad dressings with it. We do all kinds of things like that we use in our cooking. That kind of oil, from plants, by the way, very interesting, corn oil and things like that, that kind of oil is typically rich in what we call omega-6 fats. Omega-6 fats. Omega-6 fats are pro-inflammatory. The opposite number is called omega-3 fats. They're an anti-inflammatory. And it's the ratio of the two that makes the difference. So when we start adding a lot of oil to our food in one form or another, we're basically using plant oils, makes that ratio go really high. That's the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. And typically now we're seeing ratios of like 15 to 1, 20 to 1, when it should be 1 to 1. Bad deal.
So no oil.
Yeah, I go along with my friend Dr. Esselton on that. He had heart patients. He came to the same conclusion, and so that's problem number one. Problem number two with this added oil business, it's a source of a lot of energy, without the nutrients. And so what we end up doing we use up a lot of the calories that we otherwise would be consuming. It comes in the form of this oil, which in turn leads to a depression or decrease in the consumption of the foods we ought to be eating to get the energy. So added oil is not a good thing. The monounsaturated fats, which typifies the olive oil, for example, I know that field fairly well because I was in on the panel that was first pushed at Harvard some years ago, about 20 years ago. That came about because in the Mediterranean countries, they consume quite a lot of that, the olive oil, and they have lower rates of heart disease and some cancers, a little bit lower, I should say. Not a lot lower, maybe 5, 10, 15% lower, but it's convincing, it's repeatable. And so the olive oil industry got really excited about that idea. So, that's because we're consuming all this olive oil, right? Well, quite frankly, consuming the olive oil compared to consuming the Western oil, yes, probably a little better, no question about that. However, that 10 to 15% decrease in heart disease and cancers is very, very little compared to the decrease in heart disease and cancer we see in rural China, where heart disease is virtually non-existent. So you can raise the question, why is heart disease and breast cancer and colon cancer, to be specific, why are they so high in the Mediterranean countries? Is it because they're consuming all that olive oil? The answer is, from the evidence we now have, yes.
Wow. Okay, so this is important. So when you have a salad, you are not putting oil on your salad. No,
and you get a lot of great, I'm not good at this, but my wife and our daughter-in-law had fashioned a lot of good salad dressings.
Special thoughts.
My wife just said something. She's sitting here listening. See, she knows more about this. I don't even know where the pots and pans are in the kitchen, as I said.
That's okay, but you're not putting oil on it, and I think it comes down to one of your biggest statements that I definitely want to get out here is you say that the number one cause of death is nutritional ignorance. That's a huge statement.
Yeah, here's how I come about that. Basically, it turns out that, and this is based on Dr. Esselstyn's work and Dr. Ornish, they can actually cure really 95% at least, if not close to 100% of heart disease, right? If you do it right, we don't see any. In rural China, for example, we had in one county where oil was really low and no animal foods essentially, there were something like 265,000 successive death certificates that were recorded some years ago. Not one was heart disease. So let's say it this way. We can prevent easily and even reverse 95% of heart disease. That's the bottom number. Type 2 diabetes, same thing. Up around 95%, no problems. Cancers, a little bit trickier on cancer. We don't have as much information on that, but I'm really convinced it's in the neighborhood of 70 to 80% of all cancers. And we're just starting to engage now and doing some research of our own on that question. But it's easily 75 to 80%. Okay, add these up. And the other elements, they command also that high percentage of healthcare costs. So if we were to use nutrition the right way, we could decrease healthcare costs by 70 to 80%. And if you actually use numbers to describe the number of deaths from those different diseases, with the current nutrition situation compared to what it could be, then it's very clear that the whole dietary thing, the nutritional thing, is the cause, our nutritional ignorance, because we don't know it. And so it just stands out like a sore thumb. You compare the number of deaths from heart disease, the number of deaths of diabetes, the number of deaths of cancers, compare those numbers of deaths compared with, let's say, another population that's preventing most of those diseases. There's no comparison. Nutritional ignorance is easily the number one cause of death. It's tragic.
What a powerful statement, and what a gift you give to tell people that it puts back power in our hands to change our lives. And I'm so incredibly grateful to you. Now, you yourself have advocated and lived a plant-based diet for how many years?
We started around 1979, 1980 or so. Gradually evolved into it as the research became more and more impressive. until around about 1990. So what is that? That's about 20, 25 years or so. We've been pretty straight.
And how do you feel?
Well, fantastic. I'm 82. I still run. I can run 3 miles, 4 miles with very little effort. And we don't take any drugs, and we don't use supplements except for an occasional vitamin B12. But other than that, I don't know. I feel I don't have the same energy. I can't say that as I did when I was 20, but close to it.
Yeah. Well, you look great, and you just have done so much to help so many people. To me and to many others, you are a gift to this world, Dr. Campbell, and I want you to always take that in and remember that. The work you're doing is so important, and I'm so grateful you got to come on Straight Talk with Sandra Reish.
Is there another segment? No.
No, I'm afraid not, but would you come back?
Yeah, I was going to tell you about my European trip, but that's okay.
Next time.
European Parliament just last week.
Okay, well, we're out of time, but you know what? I'm going to set it up to do a part 2, Dr. Campbell. We'd love to have you back.
Okay, thanks much.
Okay, this is Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. Keep your eyes on the stars and know that your nutrition changes your life. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. We hope you've enjoyed today's show, and we'll tune in again next Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. Now, go live your best life.